am thrilled to present to you Dr. Chenjerai Kumanyika. He is a researcher, journalist. I didn't see him wince when I said his name, so I think we're in good shape. He is a researcher, journalist, organizer, and assistant professor at Rutgers University. He is also the co-executive producer and co-host of Uncivil, Gimlet Media's Peabody Award-winning podcast on the Civil War. Now, in his talk today, he's going to discuss the concept of whiteness and share insights from a recent documentary series, Seeing White. Please join me in welcoming today's main stage speaker.
Hey, everyone. I just have to say, I thank you so much for inviting me here. I am so excited to be invited to Upswell and to have a chance for us to sort of slow down in all of this chaos and think about how we can approach the task of radical transformation that lies before us. Now, my perspective on claiming our power and surviving COVID and transformation really comes from a lot of the work I do. Many people know me from my podcasts on the Civil War, Uncivil, and from Seeing White. But I also do other things as well that really inform how I think about these issues of race. And, one of the things I do is I work with the Media Inequality and Change Center. And that's a center at Rutgers and the University of Pennsylvania that really tries to use the power of research to talk about what workers are dealing with, right? Issues of labor and issues of technology. I also work with an organization called 215 People's Alliance. And we're an organization that focuses on racial and economic justice. And really, we're one of many organizations in Philadelphia who's really trying to address those kinds of issues, right? And in addition to that, I'm starting work with an organization called Debt Collective most recently, right? Where we actually look at the ways that debt actually shows up as a form really of racial oppression, but not just racial oppression, right? This is something that oppresses poor folks of all different types of ethnicities. And so I just want to say from those perspectives, right, you really get a certain take on what we're up against, right? And there's really just two main things I want to offer to this conversation. The first is I want to give us some critical tools that I think are crucial for us to understand what we're up against, both in terms of the pandemic and in terms of racism. And, it's true. When you look at what we're actually facing right now, it can feel really daunting, right? That's why even as an organizer, I sometimes have to take that moment to just unplug. But I want to be absolutely clear that the story of the fight that we're in right now is not a story of predetermined outcomes or defeat, right? Everywhere that I speak, for example, I'm aware that I'm standing on the shoulders of my ancestors, right? And so even my being here and us being here together is a testament to the revolutionary tradition of survival that has already been underway. And so in a sense, I really think that our work is about joining that revolutionary tradition, figuring out who's a part of it, who's against it, and then we need to join it, right? And as we lay claim to that revolutionary tradition of survival, right, and of collective action, one of the first things that we really have to do is to accurately diagnose what we're up against. My comrade and brother Todd Wolfson one time said, in a situation where you're facing a bear, what you need to really know is whether you're facing a teddy bear or a grizzly bear. Because if you think that you are facing a teddy bear, but you are actually facing a grizzly bear, you will not be adequately prepared for, the things that are headed your way. And so what I want to offer you is this tool that I found really helpful for diagnosing what we're up against, right? It's something that helps us to get right to the heart of complex issues. And I actually think it can bring people together in terms of our analysis. Let me tell you a quick story. I used to teach in Clemson, South Carolina. This is a very conservative place. And one of my students was trying to understand everything that was going on with the police. This was around the time when a Black man named Walter Scott had been shot running away from the police, not unlike Antoine Rose, who was also shot running away from the police in Pittsburgh, right? And so, my student, let's just call him Joe. Joe asked me to explain why everybody was so upset at police, right? I mean, this student's father was a police officer. And he told me that he knew his father wasn't racist, right? And that he knew that his father and some of his uncles woke up every day wanting to help people. So how could it be that the police were bad, right? Wasn't this just a problem of a few bad officers that could be addressed by reform? And when I think about this question, it doesn't only apply to questions of police, right? This also applies to other influential and important organizations in our culture. And I thought carefully about how I could explain it to him in a way that would bring us into a shared analysis. And I bet that some of y'all have been in that same kind of situation. So here's what I offered him. The first thing is that Joe was looking at the situation from an individual level. He was looking at his father's individual attitudes, right? And saying that his feeling that his father wasn't racist, right? But what I want to offer us is something that I call the personal cultural structural model, right? And so all of us do have individual attitudes and personal practices, but those things are happening within a larger culture and within a larger structure, right? And so American culture has a very strong emphasis on individualism, right? And so in this context, questions of power are mostly reduced to, questions of individual attitudes, right? Good hearts. You hear people talk about that. I know he has a good heart, right? Choices and actions, right? Even the complicated concept of racism. I mean, we heard Isabel Wilkerson and Ibram Kendi yesterday offering us understanding of this concept, but it often just gets reduced in the individual level to simply issues of bigotry, right? So, and I have to include gender in here, right? And just be intersectional to say that even issues of patriarchy and sexism, we're told those only exist when there's explicit misogyny on display, right? And so when I talk about the personal level, right, and I want us to really just kind of hone in on that personal level, what I'm talking about is individual attitudes and choices, right? And now that personal level is important. Police officers, managers, politicians, they all have attitudes, and each of us makes choices. In a sense, we really can't avoid contending with our own implicit and explicit biases. The rampant examples of bigoted commentary by politicians and police officers shows us that this is a problem on this level. So I'm not dismissing this at all, right? Even a lot of our questions about race with this current presidential administration often will focus on the personal bigotry of the president. And I actually think that's a problem because it sort of assumes or invites us to imagine that all of these policies are really just coming out of his own personal bigotry, which I think is misguided. But, there's actually another level, right? And going back to my student Joe and his father, right? So there's another level called culture, right? So let's assume for a moment that Joe's father, the police officer, doesn't have racist attitudes, right? He might even see himself as anti-racist. But when he puts on that uniform, he has now entered into a culture, right? He has now become a part of a shared belief systems, right? Set of shared belief systems, right? Shared meanings and assumptions, a particular kind of language, habits, and rituals. I mean, look at something like the badge, even the uniform. When you put on a uniform, you're leaving the realm of the individual and coming into a culture. And so the problem is we know that throughout this country, policing is a deeply racist culture, right? And increasingly militarized. For example, in Philadelphia, we saw 300 officers posted racist comments to Facebook. And in Minneapolis, the police department actually defied a ban from Mayor Jacob Frey in order to give its officers a warrior training, right? This was before George Floyd was killed. So policing has a particular culture. And when an individual police officer enters that culture, even if we consider them a good person, and there are many good people in uniform, he's entering a workplace that has a particular culture, and he's going to be pressured to, he or she is going to be pressured to engage in that, right? I think that and I think the same moves beyond even with police, right? When we get into a corporation, a government institution, right? We have to look at the culture. And I think that often, you see people talk about changing the culture of organizations. We're going to change the culture of police. We're going to change the culture of corporate. We're going to change the culture of a corporate organization. But, I think there's even a deeper level, right? And my student Joe grasped that. He said, okay, I get that, my father's entering into a culture and that culture has some toxic elements, right? But there's also another level that we have to talk about and that almost never gets talked about, and that's the structural level, right? And for revolutionary, work, the transformative work that we really have to do if we want to value the lives of Black folks, the most vulnerable people, right, and poor folks, it's like we have to talk about this structural level, right? And by that, I'm talking about economic incentives, profit incentives, right? Structures of governance, right? Workplace policies, laws and bylaws, how the workplace is organized, right? That cause police and powerful folks to engage in those certain kinds of practices, right? So one of the things that was really interesting was if you go back to Ferguson, there was a federal task force that took place. And they actually did a study and found that the police were being used to raise money for the municipal government. Okay. And that's why there was such hyper policing in that particular area that was predominantly Black and brown. So even if you are an individual officer who doesn't see yourself as racist, even if that organization claims to be trying to change the culture of police work, there is an economic incentive for you to go into those communities and make more arrests and subject people to that, right? That's structural. We also saw this in New York with the NYPD 12, right? This was mostly Black and brown officers who were saying, listen, we're being made to serve quotas in order to serve a certain number of arrests, and we don't want to do this. That is actually a structure that is not going to be addressed, right, by any kind of cultural or, action, and certainly not by an implicit bias test. So we have to begin to think about what it means to make change on this structural level, right? And part of understanding structure is also part of understanding history. One of the things I've done in my podcast, Seeing White, and in my podcast Uncivil, and when I say my podcast, I've worked with great partners. I mean, Seeing White actually is produced by John Bewin, right? And we actually ask questions, right? Because oftentimes what you see is people will talk about police being a broken system. But whenever people make that kind of claim, one of the things I like to ask them is, what point in American history did police break? And actually, why were the police created in this country? What was the purpose of the police? It's natural that we would assume that the police are here to protect people because we know that we need something called public safety. But that would actually be the wrong assumption. And so having a historical approach to understanding structure helps us to cut through things that are intuitively correct, but historically totally wrong. Policing in this country has always been, from the very beginning, about enforcing a social order. These are institutions that were created, modern police departments were created in the mid-19th century. So Boston was created in 1838, their police department, Philadelphia in 1854, both those departments, for example, while Black people are in slavery. So the default job of the police at that time was also slave patrol in addition to other things. And of course, in the South, the police institutions emerged from slave patrols. The Pennsylvania State Police came out of iron and coal private police forces that were being used to suppress labor in Pennsylvania. This is literally how this institution was created. This is not a biased perspective. This is facts. You can see many of these facts on the Pennsylvania State Police Department's website. So the question that we really have to ask, thinking about structure now, is if that was how the organization was founded, and this organization has never really contended with its historical role in that kind of oppression. I mean, even today, while people are talking about police reform, police are moving in a more and more reactionary direction. The NYPD just endorsed Donald Trump, for example. That's what we have to actually say, is this the institution that can produce safety for us? And I just want to shout out, because we're talking about Pittsburgh, right? Some people say, well, where is our safety actually going to come from if it doesn't come from police? And, the question is, who actually is thinking about safety? Gun violence is a huge issue in our communities, right? But there's organizations in Philadelphia like Reaching Back Mentoring Program that has really been getting into talking with youth, forming relationships with them. And if you look at the leaders of that organization, what you'll see is real insight about what causes violence in our community. You have the Urban Kind Institute, people who've lived in Pittsburgh their whole lives and understand and have trust in the communities. They're there all the time, not just when there's a police, someone gets killed by police. They're there throughout the year, thinking about issues of ecology, thinking about issues of environmental justice, right? What really are we talking about when we talk about safety? Let's get real here, right? And you have organizations like One Hood that are forming relationships with youth, right? And taking on, issues and dealing with, political issues in very important ways. So let's not pretend that we don't have people who are concerned about safety. Now, I only have a short time left, so I want to talk a little bit about the COVID pandemic. But actually, before I do that, let me just say, one of these things about the personal, cultural, structural model that it gives you is it gives you the ability to see through eras, situations in which strategies that are being presented to us as actually helping us are really just co-opting the power of movements, while at the same time deeply entrenching these problems. I like to call this putting woke faces on oppressive places. And we want to avoid that at all costs, right? And I think this is something that, those in the philanthropy community really have to contend with, right? Because it might seem like obvious, maybe because we've been in this work for some of you, this seems really obvious to think about, personal, cultural, and structural racism, right? But where it gets more confusing is when we have to contend with things like this, right? Company like Chevron tweeting out Black Lives Matter. Of course, we want them to feel that Black Lives Matter, but what are the ways in which their actual existence and practice, extractive practices, translate into Black and brown and poor and all of our lives really not mattering in the context of climate change, right? What about Amazon? When Amazon is trying to leverage the power of culture against the kind of systemic change that they really need, right? Because let's be real, Amazon is talking about Black Lives Matter, but they also reported that over 20,000 of their workers became infected with COVID, many of them Black, and essentially, the workers are out there protesting, trying to get basic safety protections, not even asking for something unrealistic, right? So how can we really evaluate a statement or even a donation, right? A small donation that they make in the context of that kind of work, right? So the personal, cultural, structural model can really help us to kind of contend with that and see through those things. And I think that that's a lot of the work that we have to talk about. And I want to talk to you all more about that. But I want to move forward because I just want to say that, let me just clarify and just say really, really succinctly, it is very possible for a racist structure to be fully operational underneath a kind of woke surface. And I really do think this is one of the main problems that we're facing right now. But I also want to talk about where real change does come from. And, like, for example, in Philadelphia, right? One of the things that we saw was as the COVID, pandemic really started to get heated up, we actually had folks in place, movement people, politicians like Kendra Brooks, who started to put the practices in place to protect people, eviction moratoriums, giving people paid time off, right? And things like that. In the meantime, the media was trying to frame the pandemic around people's personal choices, that somehow people's lifestyle choices are what was causing them to be sick, right? And a lot of those people, the point I want to make is that a lot of these people who were sort of pushing for those crucial life-saving policies at the structural level, they knew to do that. They understood that that was anti-racist work, right? In the most powerful way, because they had already been doing it in their schools. And I know that the schools are an important site of racial work that we have to talk about. So one of the things that we see, right, is that in the context of this pandemic, everyone had to go to virtual school, but we found that school itself almost became a commodity because you had to have internet access. So it was movements that mobilized to force Comcast to give people internet access, right? And that's ongoing, right? And so that's a certain really important kind of racial work that we have to talk about, right? And, Kendra Brooks really she's a Black woman. She's a city council member from Philadelphia who became an activist largely because her own school was going to be closed by Philadelphia, right? And so this was work that she began, and movements around that, Our City, Our Schools, and other movements in Philadelphia formed. And so it was in a way those pre-existing priorities that movements were prepared to confront that showed them what had to happen and take place in the context of the COVID pandemic, right? So I just want to be clear as I wrap up to say that for us to characterize the problems we're facing right now as simply problems of Trump or simply problems of COVID is the wrong way to understand this, right? And I'm concerned that if we understand things that way, right, when this current administration is no longer in place, we're still going to be facing some of these issues, and we're not going to understand the grizzly bear that we're up against, right? Because these are pre-existing priorities. And so I just kind of want to end on this note. I know that I'm probably at my time, but it's been great to share this model and this way to think through things with you all. And I just want to say, when we're doing this radical work of transformation, right, and when we're really kind of pushed through and understand it, you will often be called cynical. But let's be clear about who's really cynical. Cynical is the people who think that the choices that we have on board are our only choices and that we can't create something new, right? I think that people who are being radical, who are coming together in this project of transformation, we are the real optimists. We are also not divisive. We are the people trying to bring people together. And so I want to invite you, to work with me, and I want to work with other people and come together, right, in this project of transforming and making this country and this world something that has never been before. Thank you so much.
And Doctor, thank you so much, Dr. Kumanyika. Thank you so much for such inspiring words. I had a chance to speak with him on the phone before today's presentation. He mentioned his podcast to me at that point in the conversation. And I did what was, the obligatory thing when you have a phone conversation with someone. You say, oh, good, I'll try to check it out. I'll try to check out one of the podcasts tonight on the phone. But I actually did and was riveted. So if you haven't listened to either one, please make sure you do. We're talking life-changing moments for sure. Uncivil is really just amazing. So please make sure you check out the podcast. I also suspect I will use that teddy bear, grizzly bear line for the rest of my life. I just think it's perfect. So thanks so much for sharing those inspiring words indeed. I also just want to mention, he mentioned the Urban Kind Institute. He mentioned One Hood, which are two grassroots organizations here in Pittsburgh. They are literally doing the hard work. They are unpacking, unpeeling the layers here in Pittsburgh. They're making a difference in my community. And I know there are organizations like that in your communities as well. So we need to look for them, we need to support them, and we need to encourage them, because quite often it is those grassroots organizations that are really making a difference. So find them in your neighborhood, your community, and support them in whatever way you can. That said, I'm going to move on now to our next speakers. Mary Larson is the executive director of the National Association for the Music Merchants Foundation. And she's going to be speaking with Latin jazz artist and World Series champion Bernie Williams. Now, they will address NOM. It is the NOM Foundation Support Music Coalition. Now, they work to unite nonprofits, schools, and businesses to ensure that all communities support music education. We know that's been an issue for a while. And a very special treat for all of us, Bernie will follow the discussion with a performance. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Over to you, Mary and Bernie.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be with you. Mary Larson here from the NAM Foundation. And I want to thank the independent sector and Upswell for this opportunity to join you with our wonderful friend Bernie Williams, former New York Yankee center fielder and remarkable jazz guitarist, and the musicians that are here in the studio. And it's wonderful to be with you for this very important gathering. And I especially like to thank the Legan Studio. We're here in Elmsford, New York. And wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for your commitment to making our world a better place. And for us, Bernie, we're going to talk about how music makes the world a better place.
Absolutely. Yes.
I've heard it said these last few months that we are really in a phase or two-part health crisis. We know that we're in the realities of COVID-19, and we hope that all of you that are with us today are healthy and well and your families are okay. But the second health crisis is really one of social justice and the reality that so many people are feeling marginalized. But we're in the field of music, right? We embrace all the things that music can do. So my question to you in your journey, how can music help us stay connected, be connected, understand each other better, and maybe make connections that we never knew were possible?
I think music is as important as anything else in this world. My experience with music started when I was really young. I was trying to make sense of the world that I was living, and my mom and my parents, really, were, very adamant about me being exposed to arts and music, and for a good reason. I understood all the things that I needed to understand about life in many ways through my relationship with music. from the time that I picked up an instrument for the first time, the guitar, knowing the discipline, knowing the effort and the commitment that you have to be able to learn an instrument, and then the rewards that you get, from playing in front of people, playing on stage, and then utilizing music as an educational tool to make me smarter. We can talk about all the scientific data that points out on how music make the minds of young people better, to better understand other subjects like grammar and science and mathematics. So from that standpoint, music is so invaluable to our educational system. But then beyond that, it's what makes us be together in an understanding. Using music and arts in the right place, because you can actually, it's so powerful that you can use it to incite violence, and you can use it to be negative about it. But using music and arts in a positive way is just great to uplift our spirits, to make us be who we really want to be. As human beings, we just wouldn't be the same without arts and music.
Bernie, we've had at the NAM Foundation a music and social justice series on our fall webinar series. And our first one was with one of the great folks at the independent sector in Upswell, Habib Baku. We're so grateful for his words. And he's talked about how when we start on the journey to understand and to move forward through this time, that we need to start with ourselves and our own growth and development. And you've made a dramatic commitment to your growth and development as a musician. I'll tell everyone, after Bernie left a remarkable career in center field for the New York Yankees a few years past, and he decided to get a degree from the Manhattan School of Music. So the question is, what is music always teaching you? Right, and when we look to that reality of growing ourselves and changing ourselves to create these bridges, right? What is it in music that keeps pulling you forward to keep learning something new?
Well, I think, as you well mentioned, my career as a Yankee baseball player taught me a lot about perseverance. It taught me a lot about discipline. And it taught me a lot about, making the commitment to stick to a plan and work as hard as you can. So from an individual standpoint, being involved in music, even way before I was involved in sports, gave me that sort of that guideline to follow. But on the other hand, also, talking about how valuable music has been in my life, with my kids in advocating for music and arts education, making it a bridge to get a better understanding of people, and tell them that you're allowed to express yourself, and the best way that you can do that is through arts and music. And being an advocate for that, the last 10 years, we have got the pleasure and the honor to go to Congress and the Senate and speak to all these legislators about the importance of music and arts, especially for our young kids, obviously for all the healthy reasons, but also the mental health reasons that you get out of being involved with music and arts, and just to utilize it as a way to express yourself and your most inner feelings.
So music is a power, in essence,
There's
right?
definitely a power in music.
And you've sort of grabbed it as to pull yourself through life, right?
Absolutely, yes.
But, as we've talked about with so many experts, and then we had another wonderful conversation with a diversity inclusion alliance actually out in Indianapolis with the Percussive Arts Society, and they use the word perseverance, in the work to create opportunities for every person. So that goes back to your perseverance as an advocate. Yes, for 10 years, and we would have been in the 11th year had it not been for what happened in May. We have been going to Washington, D.C., and I'd love to hear your words about what was in the first years of going to meeting with members of Congress and testifying to Congress, and what was easy, what was surprisingly easy, and what was naturally hard about that process?
Well, the easy part was just, I guess, trying to be myself. I knew that there were a lot of people that were interested in arts, but a lot of people that were interested in sports, and using my likeness as a method of just trying to get in and to have their attention and talk about, how important music and arts was for me, and just kind of relaying that message to them. It was the easiest part because, this is like a no-brainer. Everybody would obviously agreed on the, obviously what we were there for. The hardest part, however, was just trying to get things rolling. The one thing that I learned is that things do take some time to get, to happen, especially in those higher places in politics. And I know that there's a reason for that, but for us just to be consistent, going there year by year, and letting them know that, it is important to consider music and arts as part of the, if you want to have a healthy community, if you want to have a healthy town, a healthy county, a healthy state, you cannot consider arts and music as just an afterthought. It has to be part of the planning process, and that's what we were there for.
And I will say along the way, we did help a federal law get passed.
That's right.
That was, and you have some wonderful things to say about that. What does that federal law being passed mean to you?
Well, it means a lot. It means that I am doing something in myself to make my community, in my place where I live, and maybe many other places better than where I got them, and I think, making that difference, having the opportunity to have a kid in PS 132 in the Bronx, where they had no access to instruments or music, 20, 30, 40 years from now, somebody would say, hey, there was somebody out there that helped and cared enough for us to have an instrument and to have access to music. And I would say, there's no amount of home runs in the world that I would hit that would equate the feeling that I have to leave that legacy or help leaving that legacy for the future generations. It's part of the things that you do. You're trying to leave the world in a better place that you found it, and that is certainly one of the things that really gives me a lot of joy and pleasure to do.
And I think for all of our folks in our audience that are working on so many things in their communities and working for a better way forward and more opportunities for others, you remind us once again we need to take our place, and also that it does take time.
It does take time.
And it's all right to have the impatience and the earnest and the passion for it. We were never without passion when we went to the Hill, but with the awareness that we have to stay at this perseverance. Well, the last thing I want to be known for is standing between you and live music. So we are here with, we've been here for a little while, and we've had some wonderful warm-up tunes, and I haven't heard live music in months and months and months. So Bernie, introduce us to this remarkable group of musicians here and tell us what you're going to play. And thank you so much, Bernie.
Absolutely. It was just a great honor. Thank you, Mary, for all those words in a great message. I am playing and have the privilege to play with my friends. I've been playing with them. I know them for, more than, 15 years now. Every time I ever since I made New York my second home, I have the opportunity to be friends with them, and they actually have taken me in their way, trying to get me to be a better player. But without further ado, Mr. Joe Pidio on drums, Mr. Kip Sophos on the bass, and our music director, Mr. Gil Paris. We're going to play maybe about 3 or 4 tunes, perhaps, whatever time's allowed. But we're going to start with this cute version of Dance With Me, and then we'll just go from there. All right. right, that was Dance With Me. Featured performances by Mr. Gil Paris, Mr. Kip Sofos on the bass, Mr. Joe Pidio. Now we're going to play Summertime, right? Our little version of Summertime. Yeah, we have a medley of Marvin Gaye, Beatles, and Miles Davis. Yeah, all right. Guess the roar of the laptop. Yeah. Yeah, so we got one more tune, right? This one is yes. This one, I guess it needs no introduction. We're just going to play it. Thank you so much again, Mary, Larson. It's been always a privilege and a pleasure to play here. Once again, Mr. Gil Paris, Kip Sofas, Joe Pidio. My name is Bernie Williams, and until next time, stay safe, guys. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. God bless. Be safe.